Okay, hi Michelle, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm trying not to look like a blueberry on this light, but I don't think we can get it any better. So
You
this is
look great.
it. So I think yeah, it would be a good idea at the start of the first of this series of talks that we're going to do if we both introduce ourselves. So I'm Suzanne and I run Coaching with a Difference, where I coach teachers. I coach both neurodivergent and neurotypical teachers, and I also coach those who influence educational decisions. Um, I've been in education for 26 years now, and my other role alongside being a coach is I work as a SENCO. I support young neurodivergent people as part of my role, and I also train teachers on neurodivergence and inclusion. So that's me. How about you?
Thank you. So I'm Michelle. I run ADHD Rhythm, which is um, ADHD and executive function coaching. And I work a lot with parents, mainly actually, as well as older teens and adults, mainly late diagnosed adults. I actually started my career in marketing. So this is very, very different. But about almost 9 years ago now, my three kids were diagnosed with ADHD. There's, since been a bit of a journey in different types of diagnosis. Each one has sort of had their own journey. But then I was also diagnosed after they were. And I think a lot sort of unraveled actually with each child. And sort of my symptoms, if anything, they just got worse later on in life. So that was a journey for the whole family, really, the whole dynamics for each one individually and for myself. And it was actually coaching that we all had separately with sort of different people that made the biggest difference to our family. We had a lot of really bad experiences, actually, whether that was at CAMS or even privately. And it was the ADHD coaching that just made such a huge difference. So that was actually the start of my journey, literally taking that hyper focus, going down every avenue of sort of trying to understand what was going on, um, until I got into this myself. Um, what I do slightly differently, though, is that I realized that I really needed something a bit more literal. So I do combine sort of coaching with mentoring, as like a hybrid approach, and a deeper sort of dive, I guess, into executive functioning and what that actually looks like. So yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Oh, you've just reminded me something I did really importantly forgot to say is I also have neurodivergence in my family. My husband's ADHD, my son's dyslexic ADHD. I'm undiagnosed, but very much neurodivergent. And kind of similar to you, I think particularly the experiences my son had at school, with a real kind of lack of awareness and lack of inclusion, and then the experiences that I've since had working in education has heavily informed my approach to coaching. I mean, I think it's true, isn't it, that a lot of people get into coaching and try and become certified and then accredited because of their personal experiences of neurodivergence.
Yeah, and it's that sort of lived experience with the sort of the professional understanding. But that lived experience just sort of gives you a different understanding, while also recognizing, though, that every single person is just going to present so differently. So I think it's really important to sort of even understand that with all our understanding and training, etc., it is never a case of being the expert. It's like it's helping somebody else become the expert on themselves, because we just all present so differently. I don't know if it's like that
Absolutely.
with your husband and your son, but I know, like, even at home, each one of us is just a completely different profile. So what works for one doesn't work for the other, and that's always got to be the starting point.
Absolutely. I think it's just coming into, certainly what I've learned as a coach is you come into it and give everyone complete sort of what's the term? Is it positive regard to each individual person? And I think it's just for me, it's just about being fully present for that person. And often you find, I mean, I'm veering into some of our next questions now, but I think particularly in the teaching profession, it's very rare that you do actually have the other person to be completely present and just fully listening to you. I think it's invaluable.
It is absolutely.
Okay, so should we move on to our first question?
Yeah. So Um, I think, when we first got together, I think one of the reasons why we were talking about doing this is because there's just so much confusion. And I can imagine people listening to this and thinking, oh, Suzanne, why is it that you're teaching, like not teaching, sorry, why are you coaching the teachers and not the students? So yeah, so that was going to be our first question, to sort of understand the why behind why are we not working directly with the individuals. So
Yeah, so I think it's an excellent question, and it comes up all the time with me when I'm coaching people in my other role. So, in my role as SENCO, obviously on a regular basis, I coach directly. I coach young people who are neurodivergent and also actually have other barriers to their learning. It might be they might be visually impaired, hearing impaired, they might have a long-term health condition. So I do work with them in my SENCO role. But what I realised quite quickly is that you can do all the coaching in the world with a young person, but if they're going into the classroom and the teachers themselves are dysregulated and feel unsupported, then it's really difficult to have a learning environment where they can thrive and they can feel completely safe and included. I was just looking the other day at the Teacher Wellbeing Index, which I think was published in about November last year. And it's really telling. It's really telling about the education profession at the moment. Some of the statistics were kind of they weren't shocking to me, but I think they'd be shocking to other people. There was 77% of educational professionals surveyed said that they feel stressed on a regular basis. 49% of those surveyed said that they felt their organisation contributed negatively to their overall mental health and well-being. 40% of those questions said they just don't feel supported in their place of work. And that included educational leaders as well. So, what I'm finding more and more is that you've got this kind of emerging situation whereby you've got teachers who just feel so overloaded with work, cognitive overwhelm, sensory overwhelm, maybe some rejection sensitive dysphoria there as well. So they're just in this kind of, fight or flight situation permanently. And they're just trying to, I often hear this phrase from teachers, they're just trying to get through the curriculum, get through the marking, which often happens in the evenings. Their weekends are taken up with all the extra work. But then you've also got students who are sitting in this environment and they're just also trying to get through. So everybody's in the nervous systems are just not feeling safe at all. And my sort of question is, where is the point when real teaching and learning can take place effectively? And as I said earlier on, I think that teaching is a profession I know other professions you have reviews and things like that, but in teaching in particular, it's heavily judged. You get observed regularly, there's lots of performance reviews, a lot of the emphasis on the targets that you achieve.
yeah,
Or you're helping your students to achieve. So I think even when you're in one-to-one situations with your manager, it's all about how can we help you achieve, how can we help you be more productive, be more effective in your role. And it kind of reduces people to robots,
yeah,
automatons. And I think just what coaching gives you is it just gives you somebody that A, really gets it from a teaching perspective and from a neurodivergent teacher's perspective, um, and from an inclusion trainer's perspective, but you're able to be fully present with that person. There's no agenda, there's no judgment. It's just somebody fully, like level three, fully listening to you, helping you to just find out what's going on, systems to help you regulate yourself, and just help you to just be, in a calm, safe space to just talk and find out what's going on and how you can sort of move forward
yeah,
with well-being at the absolute, prominent place. So that's why I feel it is crucial to coach the teachers, because otherwise it's like a gardener, isn't it? If the gardener can't function properly, then how can the plants and flowers in the garden thrive and grow,
yeah.
and feel nurtured? So it's, yeah, that's absolutely why I decided to coach teachers.
Thank
So
you for that. Sorry, Suzanne, I was just going to ask
yes,
you, so you mentioned that you coach both neurodivergent teachers, but also neurotypical teachers.
yeah.
How does it sort of differ from one another?
Some, to being absolutely honest, I don't know if this is controversial. Sometimes it actually doesn't. It actually doesn't, because in terms of what teachers have to deal with, the
Mm,
overwhelm, the feeling of being judged, the feeling of being unsupported, etc., burnout. A lot of teachers just experience that, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. But I think, particularly for neurodivergent teachers, there's such a lack of awareness, as there is in many workplaces. So it's almost like, well, we're trying to be, especially with the SEND review that's just
yeah.
come, we're trying to, have all this training to be inclusive for students, etc.
Mm,
But inclusion shouldn't stop when you turn 18. It shouldn't just drop off a cliff, right? So, it's about how do you communicate with teachers, the
mm,
volume of emails, the style that you speak to them, writing, how do they process information in the best way? I think, I'm laughing because most teachers meet, I think this is universal. Most teachers' meetings are notoriously long, they're very intense. And if you're neurodivergent, not for everybody, but for a lot of
mm,
people, having to sit there, usually at the end of the day, and process all that information, it can be very, very overwhelming. Things like, not having a dedicated sort of quiet zone where they can go and just reset or even just do a bit of work, allowing
mm,
them to wear headphones. Um, I think all neurodivergent teachers should have they call it like a "This is how I work" document, a
yeah.
bit like the EHCP, I guess, and just that should be shared with management and it should be adhered to. So that was a great question. Thank you.
No, I think it's really interesting that you've also sort of coming at it from a place of essentially like how they're feeling and that nervous system and that safety. And it's very much sort of like, I know that we've spoken about this together as well, but it's kind of like recognizing that without that in place, actually everything else just goes over somebody's head. Like you can't get to even any kind of conversations about how to make it more effective in the classroom or how to even implement any strategies if that safety isn't there. And the truth is, it's really, really hard for teachers, just as much as it is for the students. And it's kind of dysregulation met with dysregulation. And, we know that that's not going to be the best environment for anyone, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, everything I do, it's certainly with a positive regard for teachers, but at the heart of it, it's
Yeah.
what is going to help support students.
Yeah.
That's what is at the heart of it all.
I love
So,
that.
yeah, thank you. So it's really interesting, I think, Michelle, because when we first spoke, I don't think we actually realised until we'd started speaking how similar our approaches were to coaching. And I'm really interested to ask you, because you have a very similar approach in terms of mainly coaching the parents of neurodivergent young people and children. So can you tell me a little bit more about how that works and what's your approach?
Yeah. So it's funny because I did start out working with younger kids as well. And I have to say, they're amazing. Like it, honestly, it's just my kids have kind of passed that stage. And oh, I love, you know, their ideas, the things that they come out with. And it's just kind of like there's a real innocence there. And obviously, like a lot of things that are misunderstood. Um, but very quickly, what I sort of realized is that kids are, their skills are still developing. Their brain, that part of the brain is still in development and it's going to be for a very long time. And the truth is, it doesn't matter how much work you can do with them. Um, it is still never going to replace all those moments outside the sessions where they need support. And so it completely unravels. And really, if we're being honest, the hard work is from the adults. And um, this is where it's kind of very intentional support, recognizing the differences, but also recognizing that a lot of what we've been taught about behavior is actually not about behavior at all. And whether that's kind of unmet needs or whether they are sort of skill gaps in executive function, they are still not going to be like sorted out very quickly. This is sort of years of intentional kind of building up of the muscles and sort of like the capacity to be able to build up executive function. So I get
Can I
kind of like,
just interrupt you?
yeah, of course.
It's interesting to, what do you mean by the muscles when you talk about the muscles?
So executive function, you're building up essentially capacity, and it's very much about always starting with where the person is, whether that is an adult, whether that's a child. You start with where they're at, but there is capacity to build up to kind of, um, one of the things that I come across a lot is about like decision making and how difficult it is. And it never starts with a decision making. We know that it sort of relies on other things, but every single time you practice, you are building that capacity. It's that muscle training that we can absolutely do. But I think that sort of takes me to a fundamental sort of like what's at the heart of my executive function coaching is the fact that executive function is very, very misunderstood. And this is where there is a lot of tension, I guess. Probably, I imagine it's the same, in the schools with the teachers and the students, and it's kind of like the expectations, the judgment, the outputs, and the same with parents and their children. And very much like I think for years, we've been taught about behavior through the behavior lens. And now there's so much research that really challenges that. But then I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me in this journey, ADHD, when they talk about executive function, it still goes back to output. It still goes back to the planning, the organizing, the time management. And it is actually missing what executive functioning is actually about. And it's really more of the thinking skills. Um, I'm I'm actually in sort of training with Tara Sumter of Seeds of Learning, which
Yeah, it's
literally
great. Yeah.
it has just been mind blowing for my training and development. But she talks about the executive function as the cuers rather than the doers, and the understanding that the role of the parent or the role of the caregiver isn't the directing. Every time we direct, we're taking away that practice. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
actually there's a real sort of shift in terms of like when you're coaching the parents, it's about how the parents can then coach the kids, because it's that coaching role versus the directing role that
Yeah.
is actually building their capacity. It just might not be so obvious because the outputs take time, but it's exactly that. It's like thousands and thousands of moments of that repetitive practice of
Yeah,
every single
absolutely.
time they get to think something through is how they are building up that capacity.
Yeah.
And that is really the crux of it for me, why working with the parents is so important, because the parents are there in all those moments. And it's the same with the teachers versus in the coaching sessions, it's essentially just a few minutes per week in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So it's this very,
Yeah.
very different approach that actively supports parents, because I think in reality, the parents are so unsupported as well. And the journey is tough. None of it makes sense. Without that understanding, it doesn't make sense. Um, but I think one of the things that really, really drives me is the fact that it really doesn't have to be as hard as it is. There are so many things that can be done today,
Yeah.
tomorrow. Like it,
Everything you're saying, I'm like, ding,
yeah,
ding, ding, ding,
yeah.
you know.
It doesn't have to be this long list of like, oh my goodness, we've got to make all these changes. There's some really, really simple shifts.
Simple. Yeah, absolutely. It's the same with teaching, definitely.
Exactly, exactly. So I think,
So,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I could just go on forever, but I'll probably leave it at
that's
that.
the next one, the
Yeah.
next one.
So the next one was actually around what are some of the biggest misunderstandings about coaching and what it is. Like, what have you come across when you've been speaking to teachers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings is that coaching is for fixing. I often speak to teachers, and some of the first, well, obviously I can coach neurodivergent teachers in terms of how I can support them, but I also coach teachers who come to me asking how they can be more inclusive in the classroom. So in that respect, they often will sit in front of me and say, can you give me your three top strategies to be inclusive? In my, sort of SENCO role, I do have to do that, but I'm trying to move away from it a bit more. But when I'm coaching, again, it's like you were saying with the sort of this is the mindset, it's changing the mindset. Certainly with inclusive practice, it's changing the mindset and it's going really deep as to, what you can do, what you are comfortable with. It, I think you would agree with me. It's a real focus often on the strengths of somebody's brain and working with the strengths of somebody's brain. So whether you're working with a young neurodivergent student or you're working with a teacher, it doesn't work if I literally say, you should do A, B, and C, and everything will be fixed. It just doesn't work like that. So I think the biggest misunderstanding is they come to me expecting me to have this like little bag of magic strategies that I can just hand out to them and say everything will be fine. So it's really, I think they get a surprise because I think as well, because of the nature of teaching, a lot of teachers feel is, I'm the person that teaches you this, you're the person who learns. And so they kind of have that mindset when they come to coaching. And so it's about unpicking that and going, okay, tell me about you. How does your brain work best? How does your
Mhm.
nervous system regulate? Where are you the most comfortable? A great question that I spoke about with some other coaches the other day. We were actually trying to rearrange the grow model of coaching and just sort of turn it on its head. So the first question was, what lights you up? What really lights you up? And that's a great question to start with a teacher, because I'll probably get emotional when I talk about this, but it's quite sad. A lot of teachers start their profession full of enthusiasm, full of joy, really wanting to change a child's life. And that's why most people go into teaching. And then, the marking starts and the checks and balances start and the admin and the overload. And it's really sad that that joy kind of gets eroded over the course of their teaching career. So, um, one of the first things I always ask is, what lights up your brain? What do you love about teaching? When we've all had it when we're teaching, there's a moment when you're just in flow. And I think this is key for neurodivergent teachers, especially. You're in flow because you almost forget you're teaching. And
Yeah,
it just happens, and you can see the kids' faces light up. You feel safe, you feel happy. You could go on forever. You're not checking the clock.
yeah.
So I really like to unpick that. And I start by saying, I'm not here to fix things for you or to tell you how to fix things.
Mhm.
It's about it all comes from you. So I would say that's probably with coaching teachers, that's the number one misunderstanding.
So the fact that they're looking for you to be telling them what to do and sort of to give them the like all the answers and for there to just be a fix at the end of it.
Absolutely. And that doesn't really dig deep into regulating the nervous system, what's going on,
Yeah.
and also, and I think we've talked about this before, people still misunderstand that, coaching isn't therapy.
Yes.
So you're not, some coaches are also trained as therapists, but I'm not. So I have to make that really clear in the contracting stage. I'm not a
Yeah.
therapist. If I feel like somebody has, a serious mental health condition, I would always say, you need to go and reach out for support from a trained professional, because I think when you're at the coaching stage, you need to be ready to be able to move forward.
So as you were talking, I was thinking like, so when you're thinking about the nervous system and helping teachers understand sort of the role that that plays, what is it that they need to understand that's different then for neurodivergent students in terms of sort of that sensory, not, yeah, well, sensory comes into it, but in terms of that nervous system regulation, how that might be different?
Well, I think there's a difference, isn't there, with the sympathetic nervous system, that's that energy for that fight or flight, which I was talking about before, and getting somebody to the parasympathetic nervous system where you're in rest and digest. And just as you were saying with parents, it's the same with teaching. It's just often the most simplest things that you can change at the beginning of the class that will really help regulate neurodivergent students. So, for example, I often recommend to teachers that they start with clear aims. Just, it's surprising how many people don't start with clear. Look, this is what's going to happen. You can keep referring to past learning, you can keep referring to how it's connected to future learning, always with some form of a reminder in the middle of the class and then also just before the end, because it really helps strengthen somebody's working memory. And that does tie in with helping the person feel regulated, because it's such, I mean, I certainly went through this when I was at school. I don't know if you did or your children have, but when you're sitting in a class and you just get to the point and you might lose focus momentarily and you just think, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I can't follow. You start looking at your peers thinking everybody else is following it and I don't know what the hell's going on. It's a horrible feeling and it puts you straight
Yeah.
into that fight or flight. So just those regular reminders, It's no extra workload. It doesn't take any extra time. It can just be immediately, set into your everyday how you teach, into your lesson plan. And it's just something you can do quick and easy to
Yeah.
help somebody feel regulated. Because also, just as an adult teacher, when you look at a neurodivergent student, you
Mm.
often can't tell. You often can't tell. They might be sitting there smiling,
Yeah.
seemingly attentive, but
Yeah.
that is not a reflection. So inclusion is about doing these things anyway
Mm.
without knowing who is sat in front of you and what's going on. You just have to presume everything I do is designed to regulate those people in front of me.
When you were talking, it actually reminded me when my daughter was in primary school and she absolutely loved her teacher and she really wanted to people please her and she just wanted her to be proud of her. But as the work got harder, she put so much effort into sort of nodding away and showing that she was listening.
Yeah.
And as soon as the instructions were over, she was like, I don't know what to do. And the teacher couldn't understand. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's the thing. It was kind of like it was the effort went into trying to look the part but at the same time not be able to process the words or even the instructions and what to do. So
And it also helps teachers, that's what I say to them as well. If you're doing these things like regular reminders, which is such a simple thing, you're reminding yourself as well. So a lot of the systems that a teacher will put in to help somebody who's neurodivergent will help them if they're neurodivergent as
yeah,
well. So how does that relate to in terms of
yeah,
misunderstandings? What I'm really interested to find out what you find are the biggest misunderstandings when you're coaching
yeah.
parents.
Well, the truth is, as you're speaking, is there was just so many parallels and
Okay.
like so many. And I think that the reality is, when you bring up like own nervous system and connection, as if this is kind of like a nice thing to do, but it's actually not. It's just so rooted in sort of the neurology, and this is actually what happens. Like when you are in that stress response, you are not able to engage, and in
Yeah.
reality, kids are spending so much of their days in that stress response and then they come back home and often even with all the best meaning when the parents like, oh, how was your day and what did you do, and it's coming from a place of wanting to show interest and wanting to speak to their kids, but it's kind of like not at all taking into account. So then we get that what we think is rude and disrespectful or sort of the lack of communication, just leave me alone. And the
Yeah.
reality is that even the parents like I've yet to find a parent who doesn't want to do like the best that they can. But without that understanding, it's really, really difficult because you're going to be met with that defensiveness. You're going to be met with, I don't want you to get involved, just like leave me alone. So there's a lot of that sort of nervous system that felt safety really
Mhm.
has to be there because otherwise that thinking brain just goes offline. Um, but similar to you, I think even though I do try to sort of explain when I first speak to parents about like what coaching is and what it isn't, there is still this expectation that I can just tell them what to do, that there will be sort of like a fix for this. If they put something in place, then everything will go smoothly. And I think that this is where I can say that the knowledge part is actually the easiest part of the journey. Like that's not the hard part. The hard part is in the practice. The hard part is all those repetitions and what parents might feel like, well, they are a certain age. If you tell them what to do, maybe once, twice, even three times, it should be enough. But it's not in the telling, it's in the actual doing, the
Yeah.
practice. And each time is that repetition. And for some kids, it might take a few weeks or a few months or a few years. And we have no control over that. Um, so I think it's kind of like the expectation that after even like a set number of sessions, life should be transformed. And I don't want to put it down on it, but that's not the way that it works. It's
Yeah.
it's more a case of helping them understand what can be put in place to support them through adolescence, even into
Yeah.
adults.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't stop. I mean, how many adults want to just be told what to do all the time? A good boss in the workplace would actually, it would be collaborative. It would be asking you, it would be giving you that autonomy control.
Yeah.
And it's no different. And it's the practice reps for years, for years. Different situations, what works, in one situation won't work forever. And actually, it's not about the output. So when I speak to them and they're like, but nothing seems to be changing, and I'm like, you know, has there been sort of like, well, we can explore a little bit more, and they might say, oh well, yeah, actually, my child did say that they were feeling tired and maybe they shouldn't go out. I'm like, that's the win, because that actually is what changes somebody, the way that they plan, or that the way that they might organize their plan,
Yeah.
or that they might make different decisions.
Yeah.
So it might not be the obvious success. They might not make the right decision every single night, or but that's the point. The I guess the expectation is their ability to think things through,
Yeah.
starting with understanding themselves,
Yeah.
starting with like being able to recognize your thoughts and your body signals, and that
Oh,
the
yeah.
interoception skills.
Yeah.
That's how you ladder up to different decisions, different ways to plan, different self-monitoring or self-correcting. And these are really, really difficult things that require the safety. It requires the ability to like have a really messy journey and make loads and loads of mistakes and be like, okay, that's fine, but let's reflect on that. Um, and I think this is where the coaching journey isn't in that sort of the knowledge, the telling you what to do. That's the easy part. It's having somebody to be alongside you as you're going through the difficult part, which is
Yeah.
the practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just as much of a skill build for, I think, for parents as it is for the kids.
Yeah.
And I don't
Absolutely.
think it should be underestimated. And doing it on your own is way, way harder.
Yeah.
So I think this is where it's kind of recognizing what coaching is.
And isn't.
With you through that process, the most difficult part of that process is, I guess, I kind of understood why it was described as it's a little bit like a personal trainer. You could go to the gym and you could do your workout, but you also have, like, no one will care if you don't go. And when you're there, you might not do the best workout. So it's kind of like having somebody who just understands it and helps you reflect on what's working well and why, because
Yeah.
that's when it can get repeated. And also what's not working and why, so that it could be adjusted and sort of work out how do you adjust it. And I think that's really the expectations, like, of how this supports the skills, because it directly goes back to executive function skills of that self-evaluation, hindsight, foresight, which is so linked with working memory as well. Like, it relies on your working memory, and without that support it doesn't happen. So it's kind of like very much about sort of understanding that the executive function skills, but they're not like this separate individual like what we've been seeing. It's the planning, the organizing, this home management. It's a whole system
Yeah.
directs those skills and processes. And what we're looking for is that, not about the output, but the fact that a child can grow up and be able to do this independently,
Yeah.
to be able to
Absolutely.
direct themselves when the parent isn't around, when the teacher isn't around, when no one's telling them what to do.
And I think it's a real, I don't know how you feel, but I think when you're coaching someone, it's such a privilege to sort of be with them alongside them on that journey.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
a real privilege, and it should be a joy. The whole process should be a joy. There should be an
Yeah,
element of lightheartedness, might be a bit of a glib way of saying it, but it should be an enjoyable process for
yeah.
somebody to go through.
I do think, though, that if somebody goes into it thinking that there are specific strategies that fix things,
Yeah.
then I think that this is where there's a lot of sort of like, I guess, friction and sort of frustration,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's not at all what they thought that it would be.
Yeah.
Whereas sort of going into it and seeing it as a process, I mean, I would never be saying, oh yeah, you need to have like the coach by your side for years on end. Um, but it is, I guess, the understanding that once you know what supports that executive function system, that becomes tools that you're going to use for life. So
Yeah,
it's not
you're
about,
providing them with a foundation, aren't you, essentially?
yeah, the foundation for them to understand themselves and reflect, so that they are able to make decisions based on those reflections. Um, and I think that is where, if you can sort of understand that this will shift throughout adolescence and even later on in life, then there is less pressure. Oh, okay, this is a few months work and then everything is sorted, because that's just, it's not that.
Yeah.
But it's also very empowering. So there's
Yeah,
really
absolutely. There's lots
amazing
of
things.
positives, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that might be a good place to,
Yeah.
just looking at the time markers, to wrap things up. Um, I think just want to say thank you, everybody that's listened to us speaking today. And I think you were going to say a little bit about where we might be leading on
Yeah.
to.
So hopefully, we were trying to take some of like the questions that come up loads, but obviously don't, want to bombard you with all the information just in one go. So please do look out for, the next in the series. We were going to, just need to remind myself, but the next one we were going to look at was what coaching actually looks like in practice, and how it can help teachers and parents, and sort of the different ways that it can be put into sort of real life context. So
Yeah.
yeah, please look out for that.
Okay. It's lovely
So
speaking with
lovely to
you.
speak to you. I know I can talk to you forever. So yeah, looking forward to the next one.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.